So welcome everybody. Welcome to our 15th Try This planning group for Aotearoa New Zealand. Happy New Year 2025 for those who are here tonight. And I'm just going to share my screen. Good.
Yeah.
All
Great.
good.
All right. So sometimes we start our sessions with sharing what people have practiced at in the field, but we haven't heard from anybody that they want to share this week. So if it's okay, I'm going to crack on into the key because it's quite a long one, and I want to make sure that we cover everything. So let me just start with this. I wanted to share this whakatauki. Our key today is about place, and I think this whakatauki speaks to that quite nicely. So, whatu ngaro ngaro te tangata toi tū te whenua, which talks of how people come and go, but the land, the place will always remain. And I think when we've had a look at this key, which is to do with place, we'll have a real sense of that. So I'll see what you think. See if you think this speaks to what we're doing today. So our focus today is on key 15, and it's one I've seen Tim do a number of times, and I've always really enjoyed it. And I've been thinking a bit in preparing for this session what it is about this key that I like so much. Um, and I think it's to do with starting with the place, starting with a map or a model or a place. And I'm going to say this later, but I think one of the reasons that works so well is it's what children often do in their play as well. They create a place and then they go into the place. So we'll have a go at it. We'll have a go with the key that the example that I've written in the book, and then you tell me if it works for you as a way to get you in. Kia ora, Steph. Welcome back. So
Hi.
this is a key that can be used with real settings or imagined settings. And I don't know what Tim's going to do in the morning, but every time I've seen Tim do this, I've seen him do it with an imaginary setting, which is really great for creative writing, for it's a wonderful foundation for imagination and storytelling. The key can also be used to engage with a real place, and that's what I've done in the example that I wrote. And that obviously changes things a bit. You know, if you're dealing with a real place, the challenge I think becomes how to give spaces for creativity while also respecting the real place and the real stories of that place. So as we go through this, I invite you to look at how we're keeping that balance between creativity and facts, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the way. So this example was written with input from Warren and Virginia Warbrick, who I've mentioned a few times. They are local historians who live near to me, and they have links to Rangitane. And I was fortunate to go on a tour with them to visit the place we're going to talk about here and hear the stories in situ. And in some ways, that's ideal, isn't it? If you take your children out on a field trip to a place. But I wanted to say, yeah, this key could be used as part of that. There's no reason you couldn't be teaching using this key in a place, right? Or before or after a field trip. Or we'll find out today whether it unlocks our curiosity about a place, even if we're not there and even if we've, not visiting it. So without further ado, let's begin. The place we're going to imagine ourselves creating or recreating is somewhere that's really significant to me. It's just around the corner from where I live. It's really significant as a topographical landmark, and it's a place with traditional stories of significance to Rangitane, and it's called Te Apiti or Manawatu Gorge. And here it is. So you smiled, Shona. It might mean something to you.
Oh, sorry. Many, many years ago, I did my training at Hofupitu.
Right.
So yes, I remember. I know it's changed.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about the change because Tim won't know much about this, I'm guessing, Tim. It's a new place to you.
Not much, no.
So what do you
Yeah,
mean
it
by
is, yeah.
change, Shona?
My memories, which are a long time ago, it was very windy. It just went in and out. And I was speaking to somebody a wee while ago, and they said, "Oh, it's not like that now. It's a bit different." And I
Isn't
was
that
thinking,
interesting?
how could it be
How
different
could
when
it be
you've got a
different?
hillside and a river? But never mind, I'll find out
I
possibly.
think your friend is right. It has changed. It definitely has changed. Have you got impressions or memories or associations with this place, Sue or Steph?
No, no, strangely enough, we we've been up and down to Waipukaro recently because our son now lives there. And as we go over the hill, I've seen past all the wind farms.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was under the misapprehension that that was actually the Manawatu Gorge, and I can see very clearly that it is not. So
Mhm.
I'm actually very keen to now explore a different route up and actually, yeah, explore the Manawatu Gorge more.
Yeah,
Looks
yeah.
absolutely stunning.
It is stunning. And Steph has mentioned it's closed. She said the one time we were
Yes,
driving through, the gorge was closed. So
yes,
yeah,
it
there's
is.
this
Yeah,
there's this sense of it being
yeah.
being yeah. So, you if we were going to be in a classroom with children, well, local children will probably have some relationship to this place, but otherwise, as we often do, you might start with a photograph like this. I rather like this photograph. It kind of does give a sense of the place when you're there, that kind of the well, do you see kind of dark and towering and massive?
Mm.
Um, and in the classroom, you wouldn't necessarily mention straight away to the children that you were going to build or model this space. But since you know that's coming, you're probably already looking at that and that having a thought about how you might go around about modeling it or building it. But before we go on to thinking about building it, I'm going to invite you to listen to a story of Orkatia. Now, Okatia is the Atua or spiritual being who Rangatani believe created the gorge by forcing his way through a mountain while inhabiting a totara tree. So here's the version of that story that I was pointed towards, and I'll just read it to you now. So away upon the slopes of the Puketoi Ranges, there grew in the days of old a giant totara tree, into which the spirit of a god called Okatia suddenly entered and endowed it with the power of motion, whereupon it gradually wormed its way over the land, gouging out a deep bed as it went, until it came to a mountain chain which separates the east from the west coast. There it clove a course for itself through this huge barrier, which the mighty Okatia split asunder as easily as a child would break a twig, and on past the inspired tree, ploughing its irresistible way with many serpentine wanderings towards the sea, leaving the turbulent waters and still reaches of the Manawatu River flowing in its wake. What do you make of that story?
Yeah. There's a lot of unanswered questions for me about why. And a bit more background about the god. Yeah.
When I've taught this with children, they're often like, why did he choose a tree?
Mm.
So I went, yeah, we can't ask him, but clearly that was a good way to make a big channel. And if you've got the power to get moving as a tree, well, why wouldn't you, I guess? So that gives us, we'd spend time with that story with the children, but that gives us a sense of a story that goes with the place. And as teacher, a great way to introduce a place, especially in New Zealand, is with a story that goes with it. And I think we've got enough already, even if we haven't visited there, to start building, to start modeling this place and entering into it with our imagination. Now, as teacher, you're going to decide what kind of representation works best for you. The key suggests a map, a drawing. Tim and I have done this a lot with pieces of string and, giving out lots of pieces of string to the children and they join them together to make an island or something like that. With this one, I don't know what you think, but I'd want to make it in 3D, wouldn't you? You'd want to make the towering cliffs. And I'm picturing, I want you to imagine that I've just handed you pieces of newspaper that we might, ball up, and pieces of masking tape that we can use to stick those together, maybe some bits of fabric. Would there be other materials that you'd want to get your hands on to build this model?
If you were being really ambitious, you could get some chicken wire.
Ah, because you can mold it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Often the kids are going to want to get something the right color. Like I've seen kids grab their school jerseys or, big bits of green fat. They quite enjoy, don't they, Tim, just grabbing what's around the class. But we don't want a kind of unhinged going for it movement right now. Oh, Steph said something. Let me just see what tinfoil works well because kids can come up with all sorts of uses for unusual material. Yeah, I love it. So the teacher prompt says, I thought we might use these materials to recreate Te Apati as it might have looked soon after Aotearoa formed it. I apologize, I've just noticed I've got one of those silly fonts that doesn't take macrons, but I just wanted to point out that how that prompt gives instruction to the children, doesn't it? Imagine if you didn't say that, if you just said, let's just build a model of this, you'd have kind of you'd have a bit of confusion about when it was, but also how we go. So this instruction says we're going to build the gorge. We are going to build it together. And it also says, I think, the all important thing of just soon after Aotearoa formed it. So we're not making a model of Aotearoa going through. It's after it's been formed. Those kind of things I think are quite important. And then the next prompt says, let me just get this right. I'm going to create a line with this masking tape, and I've seen Tim do this. I'm going to create a line with the masking tape on the classroom floor to represent the gouged riverbed. And I don't know what you think, Tim, but I think that the teacher doing that does all sorts of things. It says, here's the parameters, here's the scale, and here's our thing. And then the way that you lay that line down is terribly important, isn't it, Tim? Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, so I was actually thinking how interesting it is at this point to reflect on how our practice changes all the time. So
Yeah.
when we wrote this key,
Yeah, that's right. We've never done
would
the
have been
string
about
thing.
2 years ago. And it was before we spent that summer working together in New Zealand, and how masking tape now probably wouldn't be the medium that I would use, and I'm
Would
pretty
you go
sure it
for the
wouldn't be for
string
you.
now? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be string or some other kind of a ribbon or something, probably a ribbon because it's kind of the way it would be a blue ribbon that you could maybe mold or shape. Because I'm as you're talking, because I'm unfamiliar with the gorge, I haven't visited it. I'm looking at photographs, and there appears to be in the photograph that you showed, it seemed to be straight, but in this photograph, it's got a bend in it.
Yeah,
So is
definitely.
that right? Does it
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah. It's got a
yeah,
bend.
right.
Yeah.
So masking tape wouldn't really give the right impression. You want something that kind of flows.
Oh, that's interesting. I quite like the masking tape because what it does is set it. It says this is the river, and and it's factual. So this is the design of the river, and you would lay it down. And it's also because in this example, we're going to be building something that's going to stick around for a bit. It kind of, yeah. So I think there's a case for it, but I hear you. It doesn't say
So
river.
you'd like the masking tape because it's actually stuck to the ground,
Yeah,
right?
I think
Whereas
it sets it for you.
yeah, so
Mm.
perhaps yeah,
With
okay.
a
Well,
3D one, I
perhaps
do. Mm.
oh,
Maybe
okay.
you could
Yeah,
combine the two. You
that's
could
what,
put the
yeah,
string
maybe.
down and then make it firmer by putting masking tape across it.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
would obviously have to have this ready. You do with the real
Yeah.
example, you can't start building something that is supposed to look like something and it doesn't. So there's not a lot of creative freedom at this point. And Steph is saying a long streak of blue paint on butcher's paper. Yeah, beautiful.
That would be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That would be great.
You
Yeah.
can see, can't you? The reason I'm pulling out these teacher prompts is that I think for this particular example, I'm working with the real. Some of these steps do need to be planned in advance. So one would need to know what you're modeling accuracy. You're modeling, we're going to lay things down here carefully, and we're emphasizing getting things right with this example, I think, which is quite a different mode than in the one that Tim's going to share with us. So where is the creative freedom in that? That I think at the moment, the creative freedom comes in kind of how we build it, not what we're building, not even what it looks like or what's going on, but how we build that. I'm going to squash this up, I'm going to use this tinfoil. And I think for children there is quite a lot of enjoyment in that kind of creative freedom. And we will get lots later on. So here's the next prompt. In the story, the Aotearoa started to rush through as soon as Aotearoa pierced his way through the mountain range. So how should we represent the water here? And could we use the water and could we use the paper and tape to model the steep sides of the gorge that he formed? So so again, we're setting the tone for a controlled construction, and we notice we're using the we voice because in some classrooms the children are going to rush off and do their own, but you've made it a we thing, and there's quite a lot going on in that. So I'm sure it's time to see a picture of it. Tim was already looking, but here we go. And I would show children a real map like this of the Manawatu Gorge as it looks today. So in the book it says this map from modern times includes a lot of details about the gorge as it looks today. So I don't know how clearly you can see that, but what do you notice? I might even click on the actual link so that we can zoom in and out. So here it is. I've zoomed in quite a lot. Just give it a moment to. Can you see it there? Can you see the river? What do you notice?
I can just see the map at the moment. Are you showing us?
I'm
Okay,
showing
brilliant.
you a map. So
Yeah.
what do you know? And that's the map of the gorge as it looks today. And this is the river running through it here. So that line
Okay.
would be on the classroom floor. And what do you notice from this map, although it's today, that would give us information that we can use to make our model?
Well, you can certainly see from the lines that it's very steep
Sure.
around it.
So this is
There's
an
a road
talk about
next
what
to
these
it.
mean, right?
There's a road running alongside it, and
There's a road today.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been then, but there is
Okay.
today. But yeah, this tells us that the sides are very steep. And what are these numbers about?
Height.
There's 200 here and 300 here and
Yeah. So that's height.
height.
Yeah. So it's great teaching, isn't it?
It
So,
is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think this is an opportunity for scale.
Wow.
The highest point I can see is 358 meters over here.
Hmm.
So how would we show, and then we can get to, you can imagine standing around the model going, well, so where's the highest bit and where's your bit? And it's still very much in the practical realm, in the factual realm, but I would be fascinated with that if I was a kid. I would love that.
The thing it illustrates really clearly is how the gorge follows the river. So for children, it might not have occurred to them that gorges are created by the river. And I know we've got a story that tells obviously about the gods, the mythological story, but you can see geographically that it's the river that so the gorge is sort of surrounding the river.
Often, in this case, the other story, the geological story of this river is also fascinating because this is a gorge that was created by uplift from two mountain ranges here and here that uplifted at the same time. And the river kind of found its way through and eroded its way through, but it didn't form the gorge. And it's interesting to me how the geological story and the traditional story both kind of talk about this being quite different and unusual and kind of a fabulous I find that really fascinating. The information that I read, it says it's the only river in the country that runs across the central divide.
Mm.
and that wouldn't have happened through erosion. So it happened through this uplift and or this wonderful story. And so the other thing that is useful to show children at the moment is, sorry, it's not going to be clear what the words are, but here is the Puketoi range. And in the story, that's where Aotearoa started from. So that shows us the direction that he would have been moving, and the distance that he traveled when he
Hmm.
passed through. Fascinating, isn't it? And there's the sea over there. So the mighty Totara went on a big old ramble through here, and down to the
Mm.
mouth of the river.
Mm.
Yeah.
So that,
So
So,
just so I'm clear,
yeah,
there's a mountain range then that runs right the way across from east to west. Is that
here it
right?
is.
And
Well, it's a
that's
series of mountain ranges. Yeah. This is what
okay.
one named mountain range, and this is another one here. And this
Oh,
is
okay.
the one gorge across the two.
Wow. Yeah, you can really see it in that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
right.
can there, can't
Okay.
you? That's why I
Mm.
thought it was useful to zoom in and out.
That's great,
Yeah.
Viv.
Yeah.
That's
It's a
that's really
massive
taught me a
topological
lot straight away.
feature.
So so Viv, is that like a transverse sort of fault line then? That
It's yeah, well, it is. It is because these uplifted, we're trying to focus on the Orkatia story, so I'm conscious of not wanting to kind of hijack
right.
that story
Okay.
with this one.
All
But
right.
I find
Sorry.
both fascinating.
Mm.
From what I understand,
Mm.
they both uplifted from what used to be the seafloor. So this whole area where I
Right.
live now used to actually be the seafloor. And
Mm.
those were essentially two sort of continental masses that came out of the sea. It's absolutely amazing.
Right.
That's why it's so flat round here.
Right.
And
Yes.
um, and that's why it's so steep, and that's why both sides of the gorge actually kind of behave differently,
Right.
in terms of rock and strength and that kind of thing.
Okay.
And that's why it's such a significant connection point to this day, and was for Māori traveling by waka, because it's the only river that goes right
Of
across.
course.
Um, and
Yeah.
just as a
Right.
point of interest, right here, ding, where that little, can you see the hand waving around down there? Can you see?
Yeah.
That's where I live.
Yeah.
Mm.
So just up the road and around the corner. And when I first met my husband, I was living over here, and I would drive through the gorge every weekend to go and see him. But as we've already heard, the gorge is closed now. The road is closed now, so it's no longer possible. So yeah, interesting place. So
Sorry, Viv, just before you
yeah,
move
yeah,
on
yeah,
then,
yeah. Go.
just to highlight how the experience that I'm having, and I imagine maybe the others are having as well, is that something that I didn't know anything about 15 minutes ago,
Mm.
I now know loads about, and more than that, I've gone onto Wikipedia and other things as you're talking because I really want to find out even more.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant that's the way that the effect that's had.
And we haven't
That
even been making
immediately is
it.
sort of your mind,
Imagine how much more.
like saying, I want to know more about the,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, we're
sorry, go
doing
on.
good old inquiry, but imagine how much more fabulous. The bit that's missing is the building of it. And I
Yeah,
want to. I didn't think there was really any way around that. We can't build one. I can't suggest that you do it on your desk in front of you. I can just ask you to imagine, what if we were building this thing in the classroom? Can you imagine how enjoyable that would be? I can tell you that it is when I do it, and how much investment it gives you, because as well as it being in front of you on a screen or in your mind, it's also in your hands, and you're going, yeah, no, but this would be that tall bit, and no, can you imagine children moving around it and engaging with it spatially as well? No, that's great. Thanks, Tim.
yeah.
So obviously with this as a reference, the next step in the plan, in the book, in the example, is to take us back into that past. So, what about the wind farms? You can see all these little things that look like well, they look like windmills. Those
Mm.
are the turbines, Tim, in the wind farms that are all
Mm,
around this area. This is a very windy area, and it supplies much of the power for the North Island of New Zealand. And the road that you spotted that follows the gorge on one side and the railway line that follows on the other. Those are big features of the gorge today,
Mm.
but of course they don't belong in the Aotearoa story. So for our model, our imagined model here, what should we decide should be on top of the mountains? And considering it that it was, as the book calls it, the old times, it's kind of in an ancient past, pre-human,
Mm.
pre-settlement. It's in this kind of, I'm hesitant to use the word mythological past, but it's back in those kind of old times. What what might we imagine? What shall we decide to put on the top of our mountain ranges, and what might be down at the water's edge? Given and what feels right, given the events in our story. Okati has pushed through, and the water has rushed through right afterwards. If you were molding, and at this point I might provide something with more detail, like modeling clay or um, Play-Doh or something like that. What might we put
Mm.
in?
Um,
Lots of forest.
Right. So what would you be modeling, Sue?
Um, well, bush along the hills
Right.
and um, sort of boulders down by the river, because as he's carving things up, there's going to be a lot of debris.
Love it.
Yeah.
I can see you doing
Um,
them in tinfoil and yeah, and bits of going, oh, I'm going to get some of that green paper,
yeah,
stick it on the top to make a tree fern. And Steph has said fallen trees. She would build some
yeah.
fallen trees which I suppose is the effect of the pushing through, right?
Mm.
Um, what would you build, Tim?
So I don't know. So the period when this was done by the gods, then, or by the god, this is before humans
Yeah.
inhabit.
This is like the earliest times of the land. This is the formation of the land. So this is like,
Mm.
yeah, mythical time, if you like that word. Um,
Somewhere there needs to be a lot of totara,
yeah,
or perhaps where a totara was, maybe the remains of a stump that's
right.
majorly huge.
Yeah, a majorly huge tortoise. So this is the tree that he's gone into and inhabited, right? So we that now we were told that he'd started his race or his push right back here in the Puketoi Ranges, but I'm pretty sure if you made a stump and we could place it over there in that part of the classroom, couldn't we, to signify where that totara uprooted?
Mm.
Yeah, couldn't we? So what
Mm.
just happened there, shown as a beautiful example of what I've seen Tim do, where a child makes an offer and we just need to refine it ever so slightly. So you as the child wanted to make the giant totara stump, which the tree had been from, right? And I just wanted to remind us that it belong, or were you thinking about a different one? Help me understand.
Just realised, yes, I was possibly, I'm imagining a totara stump, chainsaw stump. Or,
Ah,
um, so maybe I'd go more into a hole where the whole
right,
tree was uprooted and the roots
right.
and everything.
So we're going to
Um,
have to model that space. And if you're imagining, are you imagining the Tortora stump that Orkatia inhabited the Tortora and started moving? Or is this a different one that he knocked down on the
oh,
way?
right, no. So is he upright, or was he able to work horizontally?
I think he
Or was
worked
he upright and did
horizontally.
he?
I think that's what they're suggesting, that he pushed his rolled and squiggled his way through to form the gorge with the width of the tort. I guess it's about the width of a tortora tree, right?
Mm.
Right, yes.
That really adds something.
I think that's what I've always pictured when I heard the story. But what we're doing here is exactly what children will do too. And I've seen Tim do this, like a child will make a contribution or go to make a contribution and will negotiate. Where does that hollowed bit where the tree uprooted, where does that belong? Does it belong on the edge of the gorge? Does it belong over here, signifying that it's back in the ranges where what were they called, the Puketoi ranges, where he started his journey? And what it's doing is co-constructing the formation of the model, but also reinforcing our knowledge of the story and our understanding of what's going on, because you have to kind of sit with something and play with it and grapple with it, don't you, to really get it? So I'm loving that.
Can I ask a question
Yeah,
about representation? So the 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 tree stump, is it the stump or the trunk
I
of the
think
tree? Is
Shona,
that
yeah. Sorry, what
so
were you
that
asking,
anyway,
Tim?
so
What
that
Shona wanted
could,
or what the story said?
well, I was just going to ask, no, so it was more kind of if you represented the the tree trunk or whatever in the classroom, is that not I've just genuinely a question of whether
Yeah,
that would be the right move, whether there would
it,
be
it
something.
from my sense of how we were guided to write this example was that what we would represent is the gorge because we're making the place. But
Yeah,
but my sense was no, let's make it after Cartier's been through, because that's a little bit of a tapu idea.
yeah, right.
It yeah, and because I can't really speak to that, but my sense is that we're focused here on the place and the impacts of that journey.
Hmm.
And I think there's plenty there. And we're left imagining that mighty tree, aren't we? And I'm happy with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I ask it was because last week, this week, Wednesday, I was in a classroom and they had a model of Grendel, you know, the monster from Beowulf,
Yeah.
and it was in the corner of the room, and it was something that the children had made, and it
Mm.
was really impactful, and the children were
Yeah.
referring to it. But I just, it's one of those kind of cultural differences, I think,
Yeah.
between the UK and New Zealand and
Yeah.
mythology that that wouldn't be the right move in New
I'm not
Zealand.
sure. I'd want to get advice, I think.
Yeah,
But I noticed that it wasn't suggested in this example. So,
right.
but
Okay.
yeah, I don't. I haven't taught literally this example with children, but I can't wait to give it a try sometime. And I know that when I've done it, that idea of being inspired to build something and being inspired to build something that's reasonably accurate would have really appealed to me as a young person. I don't know how
Mm.
you all feel. And the teacher's role up to this point really is to give lots of time, lots of space, try not to get in the way, help if needed. And because we are talking about uh, history and think there can be right or wrong answers in this because it's not totally free creation, we would filter those offerings a little bit. And I've seen Tim do this because I think I've said this, but because children are sort of making something and then offering it to a collective whole, we can I've seen you do this with children, Tim. Renegotiate if it's not quite right or if it needs a bit of a think. You often find quite subtle ways to do that, don't you? Where it's yes, but it's also not included in the model. Do you want to talk about
Yeah.
that a little bit?
Well, say going back to the question that you were saying about what's on the top of the gorge. So as soon as you said that, my mind, I don't know about everybody else, but I was kind of trying to decide whether it would be a human thing or a
Mm,
geographical thing,
mm,
something like that. So it might be that one of the children says a wind turbine,
right.
simply because there are wind turbines
Mm,
there, and you know you kind of that would be a sensible kind of suggestion, but wouldn't quite be right because it's in the wrong. They didn't have wind turbines back in the age of mythology or the distant past. So rather than kind of shutting that idea down and sort of saying, "Oh no, that's not right," I'd be thinking to myself, "Well, what could it be that might look a bit like a wind turbine but isn't a wind turbine?"
mm,
So it would be, to me, it would be, so the first rule of improvisation is to always say yes. But that is a bit tricky sometimes because you think to yourself, well, how can I say yes to that when it's clearly not
mm.
right? So the way I tend to do it is to think to myself, well, what associate it with something else tall and
Mm,
maybe, outstretched. And so I might say, well, yes, but unfortunately they didn't have wind turbines back then. However, it could be something else that's tall and outstretched. And I might ask them all to stand up at that point and just to stand up and stretch their arms out like this. And then to collectively try and work out what something like that might be on the top of the hills and
yeah.
just kind of find out what their suggestions are.
Nice.
Because I could suggest that's a tree. That's what's in my thought pattern. But I think there's an opportunity for them just to explore their imagination and just to kind of hear what the children themselves might say.
Mm,
Plus, we're doing something in a slightly different way.
mm,
We're sort
mm,
of up and stretched out and together and
mm.
imagining ourselves as things
Nice.
across. And at that point, I could then say to them, what I didn't know at the beginning, which was, well, this was a time before people arrived at the island. So here on the top of the the hill would be nature. This
Mm,
would be the things that had stood there before human eyes ever set, sight on them. Just to kind of help the children to understand without me telling them. That's the thing
yeah.
I'm trying to emphasize
Yeah.
here. Without me suddenly standing like a teacher and telling them what they can and can't think. It's more kind of putting it within a kind of story,
Yeah.
and then as they're standing there like this thinking to themselves, well, what could these things be? Now
Mm.
I think they're trees. That's just in my adult head, but I've learned over the years that children are often much more imaginative and that they'll come up with all kinds of
Oh,
ideas,
I
and
love
then
that
that
idea of
be
embodying it and working out
yeah.
with
So
them. Yeah.
from the kind of from something that I could have quite easily dismissed
Yeah.
by saying, "Oh no, there can't be wind turbines. Don't be silly. They didn't have wind turbines back at that time." It's actually just saying yes to it, and then, well, what
Mm.
can I do with that? What
Mm.
can we do with that? What direction can we take this in,
So
without me necessarily having an answer to it?
yeah, so you've suggested doing one response to a kind of thing that needs renegotiating, which is to say, well, let's think of something that's got that essence of the shape and the size and the feel of that and embodying it. And I think that's really subtle. I've also seen you do two other things. One is to yeah, to negotiate the ness of it, the core aspect of it. So you're saying that the wind blows strongly through here. So is there something
Mm,
that we could create that feels right for the time that gives us that sense of the wind blowing strongly
mm,
through here? So that's doing the same kind of thing, but verbally, I suppose. And the
yeah.
third thing is, if some kid shows up with a wind turbine that they've modeled out of modeling clay and it's a dumb thing, we can do things like say, so this is from the gorgeous future. This is from the
Yeah.
present
Mm.
time. So we will place this over here. And you kind of you honor it and you place it, but you don't place it in the model that is there. I've seen you do that too. I've seen you slip things underneath or place it the other side, and it's like it's hovering there as part of
Yeah.
the gorgeous future. So we can also
Right.
play with time in that kind of way. It's always about storytelling it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Because I know myself as a teacher, if I'm faced with something like this idea and I do get something left field, I quite often I want to say yes to the students, but it's how to say yes while also not amending the shared learning. I remember once as a beginning teacher ending up with someone made an offer that someone had ridden up to a par on a horse, to come to a hui in pre-European times, like, and we it wouldn't have happened. So then we had to think about, well, so you're saying is that they tried to travel quickly. So
Mm,
how did Māori travel quickly? And there was a way, there was technologies for Māori to travel quickly by waka or by, skilled whatever. So we have to find a way. Yeah. Anyway, we've hung around with that for quite a while, but yeah, so I'm hoping that already there's been a feeling of some creative freedom, but I think you'll see that when we get to sort of step 10 in the plan, which is where we're up to now. Let me just see if I can get this moving. Oh, I have to get out of the map, don't I? I'm back to the slides. Okay. Um, So when we get to step 10 is really where creative freedom comes in, because we've set this real place and this important story and this moment in time up, and we've made contributions to it, and we've had a little bit, we've kind of gone from quite tight parameters to a little bit of creative freedom, haven't we? Those things that we might decide are there, but that still feel right for the story. And then I'm that's the prompt I just used. Some creative freedom within constraints. And then step 10 really kind of changes the vibe. So let me just read it to you. And see if you can spot what this step is doing. So I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment and look at our model. We've heard some stories. Oh, there's a second story that I would introduce at some point. Let me tell you this story, because Aotearoa's story is not the only one told about the gorge. According to tradition, Whāngai Mokopuna, who was a huge taniwha, and a taniwha, Tim, is like a spiritual guardian. Whāngai Mokopuna travelled through the gorge sometime later and left massive gouges in the sides of the gorge with his feet. So, how might we include the gouges created by Whāngai Mokopuna in the gorge? And I remember standing there and having Warren point up at those gouges, and they were quite something. So we've kind of introduced that second story, and at this point we're saying, so we've heard stories of two non-human beings who have formed this place, or Katia, who the story says created the gorge, and Whāngai Mokopuna, the taniwha, who pushed through and gouged the sides with his feet. Let us now imagine some of the human adventures that may have happened in this gorge in the hundreds of years since people first started to live here and moved through the place. Many will have travelled on the fast flowing river, which in its time was like a highway, traversed in both directions by Rangatani Waka. And if we think about the significance of that crossing, you know, there will be human adventures to do with that crossing in both directions. Others, this isn't in the script, but I love this painting here that's a very romanticized Eurocentric painting that was made by a settler. So artists would have traveled here and seen resonances with romantic landscapes from Europe and and they would have had their adventures, right? Others will have experienced the gorge on or around the railway line, which was built in 1891 and is still used today to shift goods around. And I'm going to invite you later on. You might wish to geek out, as I did, on the driver's eye view of the drive through the Mount Beautiful Gorge. It is quite something. And as you can see on the picture on the right, some people have had adventures with slips on the train side. And many others will have travelled the winding road that was built along the side of the road, along the side of the gorge, and which is now, due to landslip, one pictured here, is now permanently closed. And I'm sure that humans have experienced adventures in other parts of the gorge too, on the tracks, on the ridges, and in other places. So let's have a chat about some of the things you might imagine people experiencing in this place. What have people encountered, and what have people brought with them, and what might they have left behind? So suddenly, poof, we've got lots of creative freedom, haven't we? Sorry, Steph, I saw that you made a comment. Let me just see if I can find that. Well, Tim, can you find the comment that Steph made?
Yeah, so Steph said, going back to the previous conversation about about the different things that might be on the slopes and on the top of the gorge. Steph made the point that perhaps the creating of those extra future features might be a way to create buy-in for those kids who prefer not to join in with the rest of the class.
Right.
They could create a display of the things still to come.
Oh, nice.
The whack of the windmills, etc. So yeah. So
I can
I
almost
agree.
imagine you there, Steph, thinking of particular children you've got in your class and how that would work for
Yeah,
them. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Particularly those ones who do love the technology. Yeah, nice. Thank you. So at this point, the teacher would invite the children almost to pair up and go, oh, I'm thinking about this person or that person, and so let's just, I mean, we'll just have a buzz as a group. I'm thinking about a train driver. I'm thinking about a train driver who might come round the corner one day and see a slip ahead of them and have to stop all of a sudden. Yeah, there's a human who's had an adventure in the gorge. What about you? What comes to mind? You're muted, Shona. Do you want to unmute?
Sorry, I've got a holiday cough. Um,
Oh no, that's okay.
um, I was thinking more in the time of settlers traveling through
Yes.
and a mother hanging on to those children for dear life because
Mm.
even it would have been a trek in those days. It's a
Right.
long way down.
Yes.
Um, and just how they would have been enjoying it, like, wow. And she would have been just wondering, when is this going to end?
You've got a whole
Um,
scene in your mind. A settler mother with her family down out for a day trip, and they did a lot of that. In fact, I've got a postcard collection, and one of my favorites is a family group on an outing in the Manawatu Gorge. Yeah, and the thing behind them looks like it could go any minute, but they're having a lovely walk.
I'm thinking of one of the workmen who would have been involved in building the tunnels
Mm.
for the railway. And I make the connection particularly because of our Remataka Gorge railway. So I can make a
Yeah,
direct connection that
which is
way.
just
Yeah.
what children are going to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, my family were railway workers way back, so I went there too. I went to the railway. Yeah. So there's a sense in which you can bring in prior experience, but you can also kind of create. All right. So um have you got one, Tim?
I was thinking about the reason why the road's closed. Is it because they keep having kind of landfalls and that's
Oh yeah.
quite
Did you see
dangerous
that
to
photo on the previous slide?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
serious land. Look at that big slip down the bottom. That's the road there. And that's the slip that
Right.
yeah, like
Wow. Yeah.
and you can visit there today and the road is closed and it's a little bit of post-apocalyptic. You're not really supposed to go in, but people do. And if you've
Mm.
ever wondered what the world is going to look like when humans have disappeared, it's a bit like
Yes. Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what were
So
you
I
going to
thought I
say?
thought that was probably no, that was I hadn't quite decided what time period, but I was thinking of yeah, a landslide that had come down and yeah, it was yeah, just that would be exciting to explore that.
So you are a person who, if you were going to be a human in relation to that landslide.
Yeah, so either somebody or somebody that I cared about got caught up in the
Mm.
landslide and we were rescuing them or
Mm.
something along those lines. I hadn't
Mm.
really kind of formed a full kind
Uh,
of narrative, but
And
yeah, it
we've
was a
had this
landslide.
conversation, we've had this conversation as it were as a whole group, but I don't think you'd do that. You'd invite the children to talk to the person next to them, really, because these are quite, they're kind of formulating ideas. And I think children tend to think of three or four or five different ones, but then this
Mm,
next step really helps them kind of pin one down. So
yeah.
so I don't know if you've got a little bit of paper or something nearby that you could grab and a pencil, but we'll have a go at this. Steph, I don't know if you're with us, but if you can grab a piece of paper and pencil. And this is the Tim moment, the moment of Tim magic. This is I remember I remember this is a bit you put into the key, Tim, and I love how this takes us from kind of, oh yes, there would be lots of people through time, and we can kind of see them all in our imagination to committing to one. So see how this
Mm,
works. So
mm,
now perhaps take this piece of paper and draw a picture of something that is still at the place in the gorge where that adventure happened, the one that you were just picturing. So we've had adventures here, we've had things that happened over all sorts of different time frames. But let's imagine that there's something that is still there, left behind from that adventure, something that would serve as a clue for the adventure that happened there. It might be a mark on a rock or an object dropped or left behind. It might even be something created to commemorate, but it will be something tangible that we could see if we visited the place today. I'll give you a moment to do that and I'll do it myself. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm even just going to pause the recording. So coming back to this, we've all gone away and we've drawn a small picture and or made a few marks. It's not even a picture, and we've also written a few sentences. And we were just talking about how that does spark a bit of creativity. Does anybody feel like sharing theirs? No obligation.
I will share mine, but I'd be interested to see whether you think this is realistic from a kid's point of view,
Okay.
because it has quite a bit of background knowledge in
Sure.
it. So because I was doing a workman,
Yeah.
tunneler, I thought that there might have been a bit of a clay pipe dropped. Yeah, if I see Tim nodding because you're familiar with them, then yeah, they're as common as anything in the UK, but they probably would have existed in New Zealand as well in the Victorian era.
And
So
we
I'm
can always
thinking,
check. We can put it into our
yeah.
story and then we can check later and we can amend, can't we?
Yeah, my problem is I guess that the kids wouldn't necessarily have known about that.
But what you've done is exactly what a child would do, which is you've drawn on
You use
knowledge.
on your own knowledge. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think you can be expected to write as if you were a child. You're going to write
Right.
as Sue, and that's absolutely
Okay. So after a hard shift deep in the mountain, a weary labourer leant on his shovel, enjoying a smoke with his small white clay pipe. That's as far as I got.
Ah, yeah. And then if we wanted to add a little bit of ritual to that, so we could invite the child to step forward with their piece of paper with the pipe on it and lay it onto the model where the pipe was found. And it just adds that sense of reverence and
Yes.
and children will start to read in a different way, a different tone of voice, because they know that their work is coming forward to be laid on the model. And not every child wants to read out loud or can read out loud, so the reading part is kind of up to you, but a lot of children want to, don't they, Tim? When you get to this point.
They do. And Susan, I think that's such a fantastic idea because the clay pipe just does so many different things. Immediately, my imagination is going down there. But I was thinking, it's a working class thing, clay pipe. It's something, as you say, that you find all over the UK, but it was often used by navvies and labourers.
Yeah.
So it is found particularly beside canals or other kind of construction sites. So the idea of it being there is immediately transports me back to that period in time because it is a particular period of time. Now it's such a great idea but you're right, it's very, very unlikely that it would come from a child. I mean, not impossible, but very unlikely. But I wouldn't hesitate to introduce it myself. I'd say, well, I've drawn something myself, and it's a clay pipe. And I don't know if you know anything about clay pipes, and there's an opportunity to introduce them to something new that they don't know about. So, yeah, I never hesitate to do that.
Okay.
And we can go off and do a little bit of inquiry about what people might have carried with them at if you've chosen your moment, if you've decided, Shona, that you're interested in a settler family and the kinds of things they might have taken on a picnic, we can go and do some work on that and then come back and revisit this, or, it's just so lovely. And I love how this key unlocks different periods of time, because we might have someone who's doing a tramper from 2020, you know, four, who
Yeah.
left their dropped their compass or dropped their iPhone into the, you know, and that's still, there's still this beautiful thing over time, which I really enjoy. I'm conscious of time, so I don't want to spend too much longer, but is there anybody else who's busting to share what they wrote and drew?
Let's see, where am I? I'm not busting, but I went
God.
from kid to adult to
Yeah.
adult, and yeah. So
Let's hear it. So imagine you're standing in the circle with us, and you know, and a few different pieces of paper have been laid on this model, and now it's your turn.
right. So it was such an exciting day. We built a small can so we'd know this place again. And my sister put her, and I'm trying to think of a tin or a something, into it, which might be found in later dates or whatever. Yeah, I just had too many ideas to put it together.
So you built a
That's
small
great.
a can of stones, and my sister put her little tin. Let's decide what it was.
Um, Tin with a button in it. What would a small girl
Oh,
carry? I'm not quite
yes,
sure.
a
They
little tin
carry.
can with a button in it. And it's inside the can, almost as if they had a sense of placing something for the future. You don't build a can unless you're thinking that people are going to come back and find, either you're going to find it or people will find it in the future. You're marking something, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you're telling
And
us that
it's
can and that
it'll
tin and that
mean
button
something.
are
It'll be
there to
something
this day.
significant to the girls. Something the
Beautiful.
girls will know what the button is and why they did that. But it would be a total mystery to so somebody finding it. They go, why would somebody put a button in a can?
That's right. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Who's done that?
So evocative. I feel like I want to go and find it. It's like a beautiful treasure hunt for children. Yeah. And as each of the, thank you so much for sharing that, Shona. And you can see that the kind of need to share it back does actually kind of commit you to something too. So I think if you were standing in the classroom, you would finalize that a little bit, wouldn't you? And then read it out. And I think that's the beauty of that step of the key, Tim. I think it's just marvelous, that one, because it lifts it into from lots of ideas to something a little bit formed and a little bit placed. And I don't know about you, but even just the two or three examples we've heard, I'm layering in a sense of commitment and investment and aesthetic interest in this place. So that for me is this key working.
Can I
So
just say,
thank
can I
you.
just say one more thing
Of
that
course you
you can
can.
do with this, any of these things? Just going back to Susan's clay pipe, but you could do this with Shona's or any idea really. So you could say, here's the pipe, and so we've got the drawing of the pipe, and then we've got the story that Susan told us about the pipe. But I wonder what the people were who were around the person who was smoking the
Mm,
pipe. I wonder what they were up to.
mm,
And you could ask everybody to stand up and then to imagine themselves being the work people
yeah,
digging the tunnel through I've got
Yeah.
there's a fantastic tunnel, isn't there, with the train that goes through. And then you can just step into that moment,
yeah,
which is
which is a
another
different
way of
key.
bringing this
Yeah.
to life. So you've got the model, then you've got this clay pipe, which is great, and then you've got the people, and the
Mm,
children are thinking about
mm,
themselves as the people, and how hard that must have been, how dangerous it must have been, and then you can start questioning, well, what drove people to do things like that? Like Viv said, her ancestors came across the sea, they traveled all the way around to the other side of the world to dig a great tunnel and risk their lives. So what drove them to do that?
mm,
Why would people
mm.
do things like that? And that I find is a great way of kind of connecting things up. You can just kind of take yourself down these avenues of inquiry, really.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yes, it does feel like create a place is a starting point for me. I mean, it could definitely be done midway through an inquiry. Many of our keys would be like a standalone, and it could be a standalone, but it feels to me like a launching pad. It feels like, you know, like you say, you want to encounter someone, you want to step into a moment then, and you may not have those pieces when you set out to plan your unit of work, but they will come through the creative work of the children with the first key, and then you can move on. Or you could have it ready planned. You could decide that I'm going to do that clay pipe because we're then going to step into a moment with that family. You could have that in mind. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, wonderful.
Mm.
Well, thank you. Steph, did you want to make any comment before we close?
I was just thinking I'm questioning what I chose now because Sue and Shona both chose small little things.
Oh,
And um
yours a big
and
thing.
I'm always go big or go home, you know. Um I was just thinking, in connection to some like recent stories about waka or parts of waka that have been uncovered on
Oh,
riverbanks.
yes.
Mm.
And
Oh.
I came up with sort of a story, you know, local iwi fishing, or they were traveling for trade through the gorge. You know, it would probably be quite a essential part of getting from point A to point B for trade. And you know, with the landslips in the
Mm.
area, perhaps landslip covered their waka. They couldn't dig it out because they were just in the area for trade, and it just sort of lay there. And then you can say, did it lay there from the 1800s? Were they trading with other iwi? Were they trading with settlers? You could, yeah.
You
Mm.
could launch a whole lot from there.
Mm.
And I think it's clear to the children, to the participants at this stage, that we are in the creative part. You know, that it doesn't trouble me that there's not an actual waka under one of the landslides. You know, it's like we're talking about the might have been. We're talking about what we're doing. We're creating a story here.
Mm.
Um, and at the same time, we that a child who's made that suggestion is going to be fascinated if we do go to the museum and look at the waka that were found in the region. You know, I can think of some that have been found in wetlands nearby, and we can go and discover what that waka in the story would look like, you know, and that kind of thing. I'm so glad we heard your
Mm.
suggestions there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Layers on layers, like land itself, I
Mm.
suppose.
Mm.
Um, so I'm just going to share very, very briefly to finish off, because I did want to just talk about why this key works so well. And I've been thinking about this. Oh, so this was our final prompt. Something that would serve as a clue for the adventure that happened there, something tangible we would see if we visited the place. So that really allowed us a shift in time right from, you know, Orkatia to now. Well, not all Kati, because we said human, didn't we? So from human arrival in the place to now. And it also said it needs to be something tangible, which is important. So it's not like I left a dream behind or there's actually a lot in that step 10 instruction that's very, very clever. So what I like about this key is that we haven't done it today. We didn't actually do the making, but I hope you can imagine that creating with the hands I think it's one of an example of what Dorothy Heathcote calls protecting into emotion, because it's very safe to work with your hands first and then move into embodiment. I think it slows things down when we've made the Amazon River, Tim, and we've made islands and we've made volcanoes with those children. There's this lovely quiet sort of hush that comes over the room when we co-construct that place.
Mm.
I think it's really important the way it cements an image of the place and invested, you know, like an internal map or an external map, actually. And for kids who struggle to ideate in their minds, they can actually see this thing, you know, and it's like it takes us into projective play. Like, you know how children love playing with action figures and building farms and that kind of thing. It's tapping into that. And like I said, I think a big part of it, and we don't say this in the book, but this is the way that children play. If they're going to play firefighters, they'll make the fire truck, then they'll get in it. And so there's a way in which what we're doing in the classroom here is familiar to children's socio-dramatic play, and I think that might be a big part of it. It also creates a tangible record of your learning, doesn't it? So, you can photograph this as a teacher. You can keep adding things, you can take things away. As I hope we've explored today, it's a different kind of creative freedom. If it's not, this isn't really a limitation, but it's something to think about in your planning. It's a different kind of creative freedom if this is a real place as against an imagined one. And I think when you come back and look at the video of Tim talking about imagined one, you'll see how it's much more of a creative explosion from the start. But I don't think the key is any the lesser for exploring real locations. So yeah, if you're going to be working in this way, you choose your place that you're going to be that you want to unlock with this key. If it is a real place, particularly in Aotearoa, consider the cultural significance of the place. So any place in the world is going to have stories that really go with it, and significances and historical advances. So obviously you're going to want to teach those and seek advice about those. I know the purako here, or katia, there's several versions of that purako out there, and this was the one that I was invited to use to share with teachers. And think about what kind of representation it is. Is it a big drawing? Is it a painting? Is it a map? Is it a 3D representation? And get your resources and information right. And yeah, think about how you're going to take students there as an introduction. Maybe it's a book, a story, an image, something impactful to lower us into this place. But yeah, I've considered this to be a really great key that really does. Yeah, I've seen it work a number of times, and I actually can't wait to teach this one and celebrate the beautiful Te Apiti that's just around the corner from my place and has meant so much to me. So yeah, so thank you very, very much for joining us tonight and for sticking around to do that bit of writing. I just want to remind us, as the gorge reminds us, that but while people come and go, and they may leave their traces on the land, it's really the land that remains and reminds us of its own importance. And do you see why I chose that whakataukī for talking about the gorge? Yeah, it's a beautiful one. All right, so we'll leave it there. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Thanks for coming along, and keep in touch if you give this one a go. We'd love to hear your places that you explore through it. So thanks very much. I'll stop the recording there.